are literally shaping the planet.
Purpose is the only pathway to a regenerative future.
We have a choice to stay with the status quo or to change.
What is the point of trying to be just resilient when we can actually innovate?
Well, listen, I'm glad to be here today and glad to have a chance to share some of the work that I've been doing and with others. My goal today is to get you excited about what's going on in the world of self-powered buildings, which I may try to convince you is going to happen bigger, faster, and more economically than a lot of folks think. So before I jump into what we're finding in our research, I wanted to give you a little bit about the background on freeing energy and a teeny bit about me. I started freeing energy after a 20 plus year role in running tech companies as a CEO and having some nice IPOs and some acquisitions, and I worked for IBM for a year after they acquired my company. And I got excited about clean energy at first because it was completely undigital and I knew it needed to be revolutionized. But as I got into it, I realized, and I'll talk a bit about today, that solar is hitting a tipping point where it's becoming the least expensive way to generate electricity. And the economics are going to be what pushes solar forward rather than necessarily just the need to clean up the energy system and reduce our carbon footprint, et cetera. And so I believe that not only will clean energy improve the lives of billions of people, because a lot of people still have no electricity in parts of the world, but it will create the single largest business opportunity in history. And for an entrepreneur like me, the most interesting and exciting part isn't high finance and buying $500 million worth of solar panels in the desert, but it's instead the opportunities that live in the entrepreneurial zone, which is exactly why local energy has become my focus. And what I mean by local energy is rooftop solar, solar plus battery, electric vehicles, buildings, neighborhood stores, factories, campuses, communities, anything that sort of isn't the utility that people can build and own on their own as companies or individuals. I do a regular podcast. I've done a TED Talk. So it's an area, I'm trying to get the word out there as broadly as possible. And this is another opportunity, which I really appreciate you guys having me be part of this. Okay, let's see. So this is a small fact that people really get jazzed about. In the last 40 years, the cost of solar has dropped 400 times, 400 times. And people who are used to the economics of oil and gas and coal and nuclear, this is a staggering fact. And the reason is simple, is that solar is a technology, it's not a fuel. And that is so fundamental to the transition in the way we're generating energy in the world today, that people who are currently among the largest and most powerful corporations and government entities in the world who have built that power on top of traditional fossil fuel and digging the energy out of the ground methods, they really struggle to get their head around this. And that's the opportunity further for entrepreneurs and innovators. Just like when personal computers came out and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were building these crazy little boxes in the garages, and the mainframe world, the IBMs and the other giant corporations couldn't fathom that these garage projects could be threats, risks, could change anything about what's going on. In fact, the PCs went on to change the world and are now actually, even the largest computing clusters are actually just a bunch of small PCs, and the age of mainframes is definitely waning. And as solar drops in price, it goes through different phases, and most people miss this. 10 years ago, if you were talking about solar, you were almost certainly talking about environmentalism. You wanted to reduce the carbon footprint, reduce the pollution from coal and other things. But it dropped low enough a few years ago that if with some not too aggressive government subsidies, it became cheaper to build out solar. So we've seen at the utility scale a massive build out of solar. Still far slower than I wish, and most people think we should do. There's a lot of resistance from the incumbents to proceeding as quickly as we might, but it has gotten cheaper with some subsidies. And that age is ending. We no longer need solar to be subsidized in most situations for it to be the least expensive. And if you gave me a couple hours today, I would talk about where ultimately it leads us to where we have complete energy abundance, which is nearly very difficult for people to get their heads around, but the opportunity for having near endless amounts of energy, not free necessarily, but far less expensive than we see today, and it creates entirely new industries and new opportunities. It's very exciting. But for the next phase, and the part that I want to talk about today, is solar is about to hit, or it's on its way to hitting, maybe the most important milestone in its history. For these large utility scale solar projects where you go out into the field and behind the down the highway and you see these things off in the distance, these are the least expensive way to make solar. And so they were the first ones that got built out. So the United States today has about 70 or 80 gigawatts of solar panels across the country. And it's a relatively small portion. It's well under 10% of the energy generated in the United States, but it's growing quickly, and that's great. But historically, the commercial side of the world, the building owners, the campuses and the office buildings and the schools and strip malls and those kind of, they actually pay less for electricity than people who live in homes. And solar was not inexpensive enough to attract their attention. So you go back even just a few years ago, 8 years ago, and the cost of buying electricity from the grid, if you're a business, it goes up and down, depends where you live, as you guys probably know, but it's on average across the United States about 10.7 cents. And it's been roughly that number for the last 10 years, and it will probably be that number. All forecasts keep it fairly consistent, about 10 and 11 cents for the next 20, 30 years. Now the story gets interesting because in 2018, that price dropped to just about equal. Price parity, they call it, grid parity. And what's happened is we've seen a ginormous movement towards commercial solar. And what you wouldn't have seen 2 or 3 years ago is now starting to happen, where buildings are increasingly putting solar on the roof to power themselves. And it's not surprising, right? But the part that people struggle when they forecast this out is what happens when it gets way cheaper. So today, if I knock on your door, I don't sell solar, but if I did, I would knock on your door and say, hey, why don't we put solar on top of your strip mall or on your big box retailer? And they'd say, it's kind of expensive. It's a little bit of trouble. We're not good at it. So maybe it's not going to cost us much more, but we're not worried about it. But as we go out a couple of years out, solar starts to get a lot cheaper. And you go out another 10 years, and it's 1/3 the price of what these large companies are paying for solar for grid scale electricity today. This is a game changer. But all of a sudden, it's not a nice to have, and it won't cost me a ton of money, but it turns into, holy cow, I'd be a fool not to embrace this. And this economic tipping point is what drives so many technologies, from computing to telephony and mobile telephony. There's a tipping point where it gets inexpensive enough, and it absolutely takes off. And we are certainly going to see that with commercial scale solar. And one of the things that is most exciting about this for me and for folks that are looking out a few years to think about is what happens. Well, one of the most obvious outcomes is we're going to see an absolute gold rush for companies to start powering their own buildings. Now, IKEA is a great example. They leaned into this before it was economically popular, before people realized that you could save money. And I don't actually know whether IKEA's early entrance into this space saved them a lot of money or not, but this is definitely, they're definitely setting the pace for tons and tons of other companies to follow. So when you start to power your building with solar panels on your roof or over your parking lot or both, or in a field nearby, or from a community solar project maybe a mile or two down the road, not only are you changing the economics of buying electricity from the grid, but you're getting some secondary benefits or primary benefits, depending on your goals, that people don't think as much about. 90% of all the outages that occur, and if you've been following the news, they're occurring more and more these days. 90% of the grid outages we're seeing are taking place because of failures in the power lines, what's called the distribution and transmission system across the United States. Whether it's squirrels or lightning or snow or fire, these, and by the way, squirrels take out a massive number of these, believe it or not. They don't usually survive to tell it, but squirrels are a very large problem for the utility industry. Anyhow, when you generate your own electricity and you add batteries to it, and the grid goes down, you don't necessarily feel that outage. If you're a retailer, like for example, a grocery store, and you've got a lot of refrigerated food, you have an outage for 12, 18 hours, and that your inventory is gone. and you're of no use to the community, and your business is going to take a hit. You put a system that self-generates, sometimes a backup system, but those only last, and that your inventory is gone for half a day or so. But a solar battery system, you can power yourself for weeks, which is what a lot of people have to face during some of these large hurricanes. And your grocery store continues to operate. You could continue to sell food to the people in the community. And in fact, there's stories of hurricanes in the past where self-powered grocery stores became the hub for all the first responders to reach out to the community. So this resiliency is very important to certain businesses and healthcare, emergency responding community, municipality organizations. The list goes on, where being resilient against grid outages is worth more than just the benefit of generating clean energy. And when you do build those giant power plants, the solar power plants or wind power plants you might see off in the distance, a lot of the people coming in to build that are from outside the community. They're experts that would drive in or fly in from around the country or the world to oversee that development. These local energy projects, a good number of them are actually developed and installed by people in your community. When those people cash that paycheck and pay their taxes, they're helping pay for the school that your children go to. They're paying for the park that you go walking in and jogging in. They're part of your community. The money that you're spending doesn't go to as easily and quickly to a giant corporation, but a lot of it goes back into your own community. And that has all kinds of benefits, including social justice and equity. And by the way, it's clean. If you're a company like IKEA and you actually want to clean up the energy system and decarbonize the world as quickly as possible, there is no faster way and no more distributed ownership and equal way to do it than to just put solar on your roof and couple it with batteries. And the great news is, I showed you that graph earlier, that it's actually becoming less and less expensive, to the point where now it's become the least expensive way in many places around the world to generate electricity. All right. But I know a lot of the people who are listening in today are they're thinking about buildings not just as a shell that people live and work in, but as something that's a form of art. And I've met very few people who build buildings that don't consider it as much of an art form as an engineering project. And I think that's what makes architecture and design so exciting, because it is in fact all those things together. And when you start to talk about solar and you look at the rooftop of that IKEA building I showed you, you start to sort of, maybe it's not, it comes with some compromises, and maybe in that rooftop, no one's going to see it, but there's a lot of other situations in other buildings where it is a problem. I live in a neighborhood where I'm not allowed to put solar in a place where, my house, where it can be seen in the street, because of the homeowners association, and certainly the equivalent exists in businesses. And so the good news is that there's something called building integrated photovoltaics, which is something that the Freeing Energy Project is very excited about. And I've traveled the world to understand and see what people are doing. One of the best examples of building integrated photovoltaics actually is right here in Georgia, just down the road inside the Georgia Tech campus, called the Candida building, which is one of the most newest and most innovative net zero buildings in the country. And in this case, the entirety of the building is powered by solar. They don't actually have enough batteries to power it entirely, but they send extra power back to the grid and get it back at night. So it's a great first step. And what you can see from this picture, it's a beautiful building, but those are traditional solar panels. So just like the IKEA top, but they're using those solar panels in a creative way that beautifies them and embraces them into the architecture. And I think that I actually forgot to put another picture up here. There's down in Florida near Disney World and Universal Studios, a McDonald's has opened up and has a similar architecture with overarching shaded areas thanks to the solar panels. But the McDonald's, it's exciting because it's McDonald's, and we can hope they do this across the country and the world. But McDonald's is creating a net zero restaurant in a similar architecture that's using traditional panels, but in a really beautiful way. But sometimes you can change those panels a little bit. And so I went to Italy, about an hour outside of Venice, to a town called Padua. And I went there, I was there the very same week that COVID broke out. So when I got home, I was concerned. Unfortunately, I didn't get COVID, but this was one of the early, if you guys remember, one of the early places that the COVID virus hit Europe was Padua, Italy. And I met a bunch of people there, but fortunately, we didn't come home with anything, and we got tested. So, but there's a company there called Ecoprogetti which is one of the pioneers in creating building integrated photovoltaics. And this is an older building, and they've been living this for years. And in this case, they're using traditional solar cells, but in a slightly different format. And they've created this, I think, rather attractive wall that simultaneously cools the inside of the building. So when you stand in those windows, as I have, and you can see outside in the gorgeous landscape of Padua without too much distraction from the panels from the inside, but it keeps the building much cooler, requires less air conditioning. And those panels there generate along with the ones on the roof, all the electricity that manufacturing factory facility requires. And this is a rooftop picture of the same place. Now, I could talk a lot about this, but when you talk about self-powered buildings and you talk about the cost of solar and adding solar on top of it, what makes this so unique is that these are not panels put on top of the building. These panels are actually the roof. And I have some close-up pictures. If anybody's super interested in this, feel free to follow up. But I walked up there among those, and they used a slightly more resilient encapsulation technique. But when you walk inside that building, that factory, and you look up, you can see the outlines of the solar panels. They are the roof. And if in the rare occasions there's a leak, they literally just go up there and replace one of those roof panels. And they're insulated. And so the beauty of this approach is that they didn't build a roof and then add the panels to it. They built the roof as panels, and the combined cost is so much less expensive than putting a normal roof and then putting normal panels on top of it. Even though that's already cost competitive with the grid, this is substantially less expensive. And in this particular facility, and the 5 buildings that they own and operate, they generate 100% of their electricity this way. So it saved them money, and it's a great example. It's one of those things where you talk to people and you tell them the numbers. In fact, I recently was talking to a head of a school, and I said, you can put the solar panels on your roof, and you can, again, I don't sell this, I'm just an advocate for the industry. But I said, I was called in as someone who knew them and to give them some advice. I said, you can put these solar panels on your roof. Immediately, your electricity bill will go down. And after 10 years, when they're paid off, that portion, however many panels you bought, that portion of your electricity bill will go to zero. Day one, you save money. In 10 years, some portion of your electricity becomes free. And he looked at me and said, I don't think we're going to do it. And I said, I'm flummoxed. Why would you not embrace this? And he says, it sounds too good to be true. We don't know anything about this. It sounds like we're going to be stuck with something. I'm sure what you're saying is true. We're just not here to be a pioneer. And the reason I get so excited about this, is that it is simply a fact that this is a better, cheaper, cleaner, more resilient solution than what nearly all commercial buildings have today. And it's not that it needs to get cheaper. It's not that some big thing has to happen. What we're talking about is public perception, which is why I've dedicated my post CEO career to getting this word out. I'm working on a book. I do these podcasts. I'm trying to get the word out there that take a much harder look at this. If someone tells you it's too expensive or it's too complicated, tell them to take a look again, because they're probably dealing with 2 or 3 year old data. And this is a world that's hitting a tipping point right now. Here's something that blows my mind. These are actually solar panels. It is very straightforward to make solar panels that look like anything. They can look like wood, as you see here on the right. They can look like terracotta. I've even seen solar panels that actually look like the rounded terracotta that you see. And that was actually how Ecoprogetti got their start. I don't have a picture of it, but they made rounded solar panels that match the terracotta roofs that cover that, beautiful roofs that cover that part of old Italy. And the government there mandates 2 things. One is that you need to maintain that heritage look, they call it, and you need to have solar on your roof. And so there's been a rapid growth of market of even more sophisticated looking terracotta colored panels in that part of Italy. So this is happening now. And if you follow the space at all, you've probably noticed that Tesla has announced the 3rd version of their solar glass. And this is a shingle replacement. So rather, again, like they did in Ecoprogetti, rather than putting on a normal roof and then adding in solar panels, Tesla is pioneering. They're not the first, but they're certainly the biggest and most famous and best at marketing the idea that don't put up new shingles. If you're re-roofing your house, put up the solar shingles. And the result is a system that is the solar shingles plus the plus regular shingle. I'm sorry, if you were to add new shingles and put third-party standard solar panels on your roof, that's actually more expensive than the solar shingles by themselves. So this is all. If you're thinking about replacing your roof, jumping into this immediately will not only lower your costs, it will obviously accomplish all kinds of goodness for the environment and for your electricity bills. And in nearly all cases I'm aware of, homeowners associations have no issues with this whatsoever because it meets their criteria. In other parts of the world where they use different style of roofs, they're typically even more ahead of the United States in terms of combining the idea of aesthetic solar roofs with the traditional style of roofs that are employed in that part of the world. There's even cool stuff coming out like solar windows. There's actually more examples than I could find photographs of. And I've talked to some companies who make windows, and they plan to ship high quality, effective windows that have the benefit of having, by absorbing some of the light spectrum and using it to power solar, they're able to reduce the inbound heating issues and generate electricity at the same time and last 30 years, however long the windows and buildings need to last. And they're doing this all at once. And so the bad news of windows in most places is that the sun only hits the windows for a part of the time versus the roof. The sun hangs over the roof the entire day. So they tend to generate less electricity. But again, the cost of adding solar to an already expensive large-scale commercial window is not that much. And so it's and will ultimately end up paying for itself in the years as it generates electricity. There's a lot of companies in this space. None yet to the commercial scale that say the Tesla solar glass is, and even that's still early, but watch this space, it's happening, and it's just another way that buildings will become self-powered. I didn't put a picture here of solar canopies, but for big box retailers, schools, anywhere in the suburban part of the world where we drive our car, park in a giant parking lot, lament how much green space is lost as we park all of our cars, those economics are becoming attractive very quickly as well. So the ability to not only generate electricity from your parking lot, but to protect the cars, keep them from getting incredibly hot during the middle of the summer day, and ironically, to actually charge the electric cars that plug in. I think solar canopies on parking lots is going to become another one of those huge growth areas. And you don't have to look far to see statistics that if you just put a solar canopy on across, not that you realistically could, but if you put a solar canopy on all of the parking lots across the United States, you'd have enough electricity to power the United States or close to it. So the scale of the opportunity is enormous. And so, but getting right back just to solar, just to commercial, the potential for this idea is just incredibly exciting. Today, only 3.5% of buildings that could have solar have it. And this is very, very conservative. This is buildings that can generate meaningful amounts of electricity with roofs. It assumes that only half of the roof is capable of holding solar, where most roofs can, 80, 90%. Very, very, very conservative estimates. They've counted 600,000 commercial buildings. These are large buildings that can put solar on the roof to power themselves. The total capacity, if all of these, again, this is theoretical, but it makes a point. If you put solar on all of these commercial buildings, and you're only covering half of the roof of these buildings, and you're only going on the roofs of the buildings that are the easiest and just no issues whatsoever, you would generate 145 gigawatts of solar power. How much is that? Well, all the solar electricity generated in the United States, all the solar plants installed over the last 2 decades, total 85 gigawatts. So the capacity opportunity on commercial buildings is just stunning, and the economics are positive. This is, I remember it was a book I read a couple of years ago, and it asked this great question. It was an interview question. They recommended that people ask interviewees, and I never forgot it. The question was, what do you know? What are you sure about that almost no one else sees? What are you confident of that you'd be willing to argue heavily with someone whose dogmatic approach may not appreciate this thing that you understand? And for me, these numbers I've shared with you, the fact that commercial scale solar, that buildings and architecture are converging to not only be clean, not only to decarbonize the grid, but to add resiliency, to save money, this opportunity is absolutely enormous. This is a tens of billions of dollars in opportunity a year coming up right on us now. And so this was the message I wanted to share with you today. I'm obviously passionate about it, and I'm hoping that people will take a minute to take a look at a bit further, a little deeper, and realize that even if maybe September of 2020 isn't exactly the right time, the reality, the economics, the possibility, the technology of self-generating powered buildings is here now, and it has a chance to do more quickly to decarbonize the grid than all the policy, all the politicians we vote for. This has a chance to make a huge difference very quickly. So I hope a few of you get excited about this. If you go to my website, I have a /Shadow 2020, and you can get more information you can get this slideshow, and you can also learn more about what we're doing in overall local energy, and particularly around buildings. And that kind of wraps up, so thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes this session. And for anyone, we do have some minutes between the next session. So for anyone who has questions, you can feel free to pop those up now, Bill, if you have some time.
Yeah.
You can pop those into the Slack channel where we've got some discussions going on.
Yeah, I'm gonna head over to the Slack channel.
All right, I don't see any questions coming through. So
Well, I encourage people to go to the website and check out Shadow 2020 and learn some more about this stuff. And I think this is, for folks in the built environment, this is probably one of the most innovative ways to reduce the costs and to increase the resiliency that they're going to find across the energy spectrum. So thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
yeah, and we actually did just have a question pop up.
Okay, all right. Don't see it.
He says, our company is building a series of highly sustainable multifamily developments in the Phoenix metro area. Working towards net zero positive, we have put our solar arrays on 12-foot risers and placed our HVAC systems underneath the shade to increase efficiency. Just thought it would be worth sharing.
That's fantastic. And there's probably not a better place in the U.S. to generate solar electricity than where you are. There's a great study just came out in a book called Beyond Carbon, which is a great book for utility nerds, and it describes Phoenix specifically is the city in the United States that has the best opportunity. If you were to put up canopy solar and building solar, even in the dense parts of Phoenix, you can easily power the entire city with solar. You can't say that of New York City, for example. Certainly can't say that of the northern latitudes, but Phoenix is hoped to be one of the cities that self-powers more quickly than locally than any other. It's a great place to be, and sounds like a fantastic project.
Awesome. I don't see anything else coming through. So once again, please feel free to hit the Slack channel just in case you have questions that kind of come up later on. And thank you again, Bill. For any of you who are looking to stick around for the next talk in this session, the title of the next session is Innovation in Commercial Real Estate with Steven Silverman. So that will happen at 3:45. And until then, we've got about a 30-minute break. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.